Okay, so kind of since the beginning of this medical immunology course, we've been talking about these things called cytokines, which are having an effect on cells. So, like when we went over in the differentiation of naive T cells, uh, we talked about these different molecules, interleukin 12, interleukin 4, and interleukin 1 beta, resulting in the differentiation of these naive helper T cells into one of these three types of helper T cell, each with its own unique function, and then these different types of helper T cells then produce their own kind of cytokines to produce different functions. So we've come into contact with cytokines before. We're going to fully explain what they actually are, what properties they have, and we're going to talk about some important ones in this one. It's probably going to be a shorter video. We're not going to go into a massive amount of depth. You just need to kind of know what they are, kind of stimulatory molecules. You can see this image here. A stimulus happens to a cytokine producing cell. The cytokine producing cell responds by producing cytokines. These cytokines are picked up by the receptors of a target cell and it's going to produce an effect. So if we go back to this cell, you can imagine a different kind of cell is picking up a stimulus to tell it that we need to mature. Well, specifically for maturing naive T cells, it would be the antigen presenting cell. So either the dendritic cell or the macrophage, if we're talking about naive T cell maturation in the lymph node. The antigen presenting cell would produce one of these cytokines to help differentiation of this naive T cell, and then once the naive T cell is differentiated, it's going to produce its own cytokines to produce the effect that we can see in this photo. So we can imagine the cytokine producing cell would be a dendritic cell or a macrophage. It's going to release cytokines to the target cell, which would be the naive T cell. The naive T cell responds, has these cellular signals, and differentiates into one of the various kinds of T helper cell that we talked about. Last one, like Th1, Th2, Th17. And then the effect, once they've differentiated, would be the cytokine that each one of these different helper T cells produce. So you can imagine if it became Th1 helper T cell, the effect would be secreting interferon gamma. So cytokines are proteins secreted by cells of the immune system, produced in response to an antigen. Different cytokines stimulate various responses in these cells that mediate and regulate immune and inflammatory reactions. These are some of the properties of cytokines. A single cytokine can act on several cell types. For example, interleukin 2 can affect all lymphocytes, so it can affect B cells, T cells, and natural killer cells. Some cytokines can mediate different functions in different cells. So interleukin 12 can make it can have the function of making CD4 helper T cells and natural killer cells produce interferon gamma, but it can also have the function of making cytotoxic T cells and natural killer cells more cytotoxic. So it's one cytokine, but it has multiple functions. Many cytokines have the same effect on many cells, though. For example, interleukin 10 and TGF-beta can inhibit T cell effector function, indiscriminate of the type of T cell it's interacting with. Some increase synthesis and activity of other cytokines. So, for example, interleukin-12 can increase synthesis of interferon gamma. And some can antagonize the effect of other cytokines, so kind of have inhibitory properties, like interleukin-10 can antagonize interferon gamma and interfere with any signals that interferon gamma is trying to put out there. Cytokines have different effects at different concentrations as well. A couple of examples of important cytokines that we've come across before. Interleukin-2 is responsible for T-cell clonal expansion, so that's when the antigen-presenting cell presents the antigen on a MHC class 1 or MHC class 2 to the naive T-cell with its T-cell receptor and either CD4 or CD8 co-receptor. And then if it picks up the antigen on the antigen-presenting cell, then we know it has a complementary T-cell receptor that can pick up that antigen, so it wants to divide because it's able of recognizing the antigen, so it undergoes clonal expansion to produce thousands of other T-cells that can recognize the antigen. While it can do this, interleukin-2 also regulates T-cell development and survival, as well as natural killer cell proliferation and cytotoxicity. So you can imagine interleukin-2 is important for T-cell clonal expansion and natural killer cell clonal expansion. So if you want to think of it as a general rule, interleukin-2 results in clonal expansion or proliferation of all kinds of lymphocytes, except for B cells. Now, interferon gamma, which we have come across a lot, it's responsible for macrophage activation, B cell immunoglobulin isotype switching, which we're going to go over in the next video, the development of Th1 effector cells, like you can see here, and it also increases MHC expression and antigen presentation. So very important properties for these. I'd remember these. These are just examples that I put for the different properties that cytokines have. I don't think you really need to memorize them. It kind of depends on your syllabus. It couldn't hurt, but I'd more focus on these. These are kind of more important ones, particularly interferon gamma. Ooh, there's an accident. Something I just want to tag at the end of that because I didn't include it on my video on T-cells, the part 1 and part 2 on the T-cells. We forgot to go over regulatory T-cells. Well, we went over them a bit, but I just want to go into a bit more depth. Regulatory T-cells are specialized subpopulations of T-cells. They have the job of suppressing activation of the immune system as a means to maintain homeostasis, which is stable conditions within the body, and to maintain tolerance to self-antigens, so to prevent us from getting autoimmune diseases. They reduce the chance of autoimmune diseases as well as metabolic diseases and allergies. The main two immunosuppressive cytokines are interleukin-10 and TGF-beta. So two of the main cytokines produced by the regulatory T cells. I'd remember those. So yeah, like I said here, in the next one we're going to go more into B cells. So we've finished a lot of our talk on the different kinds of T cells and their functions. In the next one we're going to move on to B cells, the other main type of lymphocytes, and we're going to talk about how a bit about their antibodies that we call immunoglobulins. So yeah, that's it for the cytokines.